Welcome to Russian History with Dr. Brovkin. Today I continue a series of presentations about President Putin, but this one concerns one of the most tragic and one of the most difficult issues, which is the war in eastern Ukraine. So the focus here is not on the official story. If you want to look at the Western sources and how they relate these events, I'll sum up very quickly. Russia is an aggressor. It was a glorious revolution of Maidan in Ukraine against corruption, against Yanukovych, the previous president. The revolution led by the forces that wanted Ukraine to have democracy, to join European. The aggressor Russia took over parts of Ukraine, such as Crimea and Donbas. And now the suffering Ukrainian people are complaining all over the world about Russian aggression. So this is this is the official story. Now, if you're satisfied with that story, just turn off and don't watch any further. See the way, if you want to understand the way the Russians see the problem and what happened, then this is the presentation for you. But my purpose here is not just to represent the Russian view, but to try to analyze how President Putin handled this very, very touchy and difficult issue. So, the facts are that yes, it was a revolution of Maidan. It was to join the associated membership of the European Union. And indeed, there was this popular upheaval that came to power and seized power on the 23rd of February 2014. There's one important issue which the Russians always pay attention to, which is that the agreement that was signed with the participation of Western, German and French observers was that Yanukovych resigns and has new elections before November 2014. So this was the condition. This was violated the next day. Next day, he fled Kiev because he claimed that his life was in danger, and then the revolution happened. In other words, the forces opposing him seized power. Now then he moved on to Donetsk, which is in Donbas, and this is where he stayed, and this is where the resistance to this coup d'etat formed. Now, at this time, there's Olympics going on, and the last thing that Putin wanted was some kind of international crisis. So his first reaction was, hush, hush, don't do anything. And in the meantime, the Ukrainian forces that seized power in Kiev were trying to take more and more territory in the eastern parts of Ukraine. Now, eastern parts of Ukraine are Russian-speaking. They were, from the very beginning, opposed to the events in Kiev. In other words, I followed the resolutions of the Crimea and Donetsk city Soviets, and there's a record that could be easily proven that each time that there was, escalation of conflict and new fighting, and especially when they seized power, they started talking about not accepting it. Now, up to that point, up to 23rd of February, there was no talk of secession. There was no talk of joining Russia. This came up as they understood that they would have to live under the leadership of the Western Ukrainians who wanted to join European Union and NATO. Now, the point I want to make about Crimea is the population of Crimea is 90% Russian. It was given to Ukraine by the order of Khrushchev in 1954. The agreement was that Russia would continue to have its military base in Sevastopol, and nothing was disturbing that agreement. Russian fleet was there, Russian military bases were there, as long as Ukraine was friendly with Russia, and they had this, system of relationships that guaranteed the presence of Russian troops. However, with this revolution that happened, they wanted to join EU and by implication NATO. Now that was unacceptable to most people in Crimea and also to Russia. So when you follow the crisis, then there was a delegation that went over to Moscow. Then there was the military bases. They refused to comply with Ukrainian authorities. In other words, Putin was faced pretty much with a fait accompli in a sense that the local people, the military units, the Cossacks, and the military base there, they absolutely refused to accept the new authority in Kiev, and then they sent their delegation to Moscow, and the Duma in Moscow supported them, so Putin really couldn't go against them. So he said, okay, fine, and they put this operation of sending some troops who had these uniforms without insignia, the well-known story. Then there was a referendum, and it was a true referendum, and 85 or 95% of the people there voted to join Russia, which is perfectly legitimate. Don't forget, Crimea was already an autonomous republic, not just some kind of province of Ukraine. And let's go to Donbas then. It's a pretty similar situation, except in Donbas, Putin didn't do anything at all until they were actually approaching the center of the city of Donetsk and Lugansk. If we look at the map of the area, you would see that even today the demarcation line is not the provinces of Donetsk and Lugansk, but they are half of this. So in other words, the fighting stopped right at the edge of the city, and a huge fighting was going on for the airport in Donetsk. In other words, what Putin is reproached for by many people today is that if he decided to support the Donbas, why give them half of the province? Why not, where the province ends or the borderlines of the province? No, he basically just stopped just at the last minute when any further advance would have already meant the takeover of the city of Donetsk and Lugansk. Now, they had a referendum, and they didn't want to accept the rule of what they consider neo-Nazis in Kiev. And they proclaimed independence. And Putin, I remember, said very clearly in the spring of 2014, that you have to respect the referendum. Well, the point is he didn't. And this is one of the things he's reproached for. He did not respect the referendum in terms of having these people in Donbas join Russia. He held on to this notion that this is Ukrainian territory and he cannot violate the integrity of Ukraine. Now, the interesting thing is that there was an option that he was offered. Yanukovych was elected president and his term hasn't expired. Moreover, the people in Kiev signed an agreement that new elections would be held. In other words, Yanukovych was a legitimate president of Ukraine. Well, what Putin could have done, and the West doesn't understand this, that he didn't do this. What he could have done, he could have said, okay, we're going to support the legitimate president Yanukovych and send Russian troops upon his request to sustain him in power in eastern Ukraine. Moreover, they could have moved over. I think he admitted in one of his interviews later that in 2014, Russian troops could have easily, legitimately supported Yanukovych and moved all the way to Kiev. He didn't do it because he didn't want the war. It was many other factors. He didn't want to scare the Belarus. He didn't want to scare Kazakhstan. He wanted to end things peacefully. And so in that sense, he could not afford to let go of Donbas. He couldn't let them crush it. At the same time, he didn't want them to win because of his desire to continue the Nord Stream 2 construction and not to alienate other republics of the former Soviet Union, etc. I think these were his motivations. In other words, the situation in the summer of 2014 was fighting. And then again, when the Donbas people with Russian military aid and some volunteers, but not regular Russian troops, when they won and pushed the Ukrainian nationalist forces out of some areas of Donbas, Putin let them stop without taking Mariupol, which is a city on the Azov Sea. He let them stop, even though that is a part of Donetsk province. So in other words, Putin's solution was freeze the conflict. And that's what happened, and this is the situation as it continues today. I heard memoirs of Hollande that he, described how all night long he and Merkel and Putin, they were just negotiating, trying to find a formula. Finally, they found the formula of Minsk Accords, which is freeze the conflict, and then Donbas is supposed to have autonomy, and then the sovereignty of Ukrainian government would be over all of the area. But first, they had to implement the law of the separate status of Donbas and having its autonomy and self-rule. Now they have refused to do that, and therefore the situation is still where it was. And there are thousands of shellings and dead people and casualties, and the conflict goes on and on and on, and there's no solution to it. But Putin wants to freeze the conflict, and there's no solution. And this is his biggest weakness, because as time goes on, this half measure is not acceptable to anybody. The Ukrainians have refused to Poroshenko and then Zelensky, and as years go by, but none of them really is ready to accept the separate status of Donbas. Moreover, the regime has hardened in Kiev. They are now banned the use of the Russian language. They are now having literally discriminatory laws against the Russian speakers, and they want to join NATO. And this last issue is the one that is absolutely crucial for understanding what is going to happen in the future. Because when I watch the debates in the Russian media and among Russian political parties, what the West does not understand is Putin is the guy who is trying to campaign this rage that is rising in all political areas, all political spectrum of Russia against toleration any further of American interference, and they talk about Ukraine joining NATO or some other one. When they have military maneuvers in Ukraine with participation of 15 member states of NATO, all I hear from all political parties in Russia is rising rage that one day even Putin is not going to able to contain. In other words, Putin's solution of this problem is no solution, and that is what I can hear more and more. There's a critique rising in many of the talk shows and newspapers and radio, which is more like, how long are we going to put up with this nonsense? These are neo-Nazis. They built monuments to Bandera. This is their hero. Bandera signed a pact with Hitler. His forces were collaborationists and killing Jews and others during the war. These are the heroes of modern Ukraine. Americans support them. They want to join NATO. Do we want to wait until there are American missiles in Kharkov, 300 kilometers from Moscow? That's totally unacceptable. In other words, even Putin says that if Ukraine tries anything with military solution of Donbas, then they're going to lose their statehood. But so far, it's just talk and no action. My point here is that Putin's handling of Ukrainian crisis is not his best in terms of trying to resolve the issue. He postponed the issue. He reacted to the issue rather than take some firm decision and hold on to it. In other words, the future is uncertain, but what is certain is that American presence in Ukraine and any military installation, and especially any kind of attempt to arm Ukrainians and force this issue on Russia, will lead to a very quick and very decisive war that Ukraine is going to collapse. And the only thing that the Russians are discussing is how much of it should be liberated from the neo-Nazis. The program minimum is Donbas in itself. Then there is a central Ukraine, which is Kharkov, Poltava, Kherson, and Nikolaev. This is the area where there are a mix of Ukrainian and Russian population, but mostly this is like a dialect of Russian that they speak, which is like the core of central Ukraine. And then there's the western Ukraine, which is most nationalistic, people in Lvov, or they call it Lviv, which had never been a part of Russia, which was Austria-Hungary before World War I, which was Poland between World War I and World War II. And this is where the core of the Ukrainian nationalists and Banderavites are. Now, nobody wants to touch them. Nobody wants to admit them to Russia, even if they were conquered. So These are the scenarios of the possible resolution, but I'm quite convinced it's not going to last like this because Ukraine is in free fall. There are 37 million people there. There used to be 52. There are hundreds of thousands of refugees. 800,000 taken Russian passports in Donbas. Other hundreds of thousands are taken Polish citizenship, and some of them Hungarian citizenship. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians left Ukraine in search of jobs in Western Europe, and they do all kinds of service jobs and drivers and other menial jobs. So Ukraine cannot boast of having economic success and miracle after its liberation from the Russians, as they call it. It is in free fall, and the resolution of the crisis should be sometime soon. Thank you. Bye. Don't forget to subscribe.